Hello, everyone. We're just going to give you a few minutes to jump in. Zoom can take a little bit to get everybody into the webinar, so we're just going to give a quick second. Welcome, welcome, everyone. We see everyone coming in. We're up to just about 200 people on the webinar, just crossed 200. Just while we're getting everyone in, let's go ahead and start giving instructions for how to use the chat window.
Yeah, so hi everybody, thanks for joining us. If you've ever been with us during our monthly momentum calls, we're going to do things a little bit differently today due to the awesomely large amount of people on today's call. So on the right side of the screen, you'll see the chat feature, which you can also click the chat button underneath the video to access that. So in the chat, that's where you can talk to each other, support each other, and also check out resources we'll be posting throughout the call. And then if you have a question for Charlie and Angela, we ask that you please only use the Q&A button underneath the video to ask them a question directly.
All righty, you want to open up with your...
Yeah, are we getting the presentation started or
Let's
are
go
they going to?
Let's go ahead and do that.
Okay.
I need to share it. Turns out.
Yeah.
Alrighty, Jess, everyone can see our screen, correct?
Yep, and I'll post a link to download the PDF so folks can have that also.
Wonderful, thank you, Jess. All right, so in just a moment, Charlie and I are going to get this webinar officially started and introduce ourselves and let you know what we're going to be handling today. But we wanted to start the first 30 to 45 seconds with asking you to just intentionally ground yourself in this space here in this moment today. We know that there is a lot of fear, there's a lot of uncertainty going on in the world today, and it can be hard to leave that out there. And we don't expect you to be able to do that, but what we would like to ask before we get started is that each of us take the next 20 to 30 seconds and feel your feet on the ground. Charlie and I are doing that. We're standing here barefoot today, feet firmly on the ground, and take a couple of deep breaths. And while you're grounding yourself in this space, in this moment, I just want you to ask yourselves, what do I need in this next hour and 15 minutes? And what would I like to walk away with today? All right. Thank you for allowing that space to just get yourself here and present with us today.
One of the reasons we wanted to start with making space is in times like these, it seems like everything is coming at us so quickly. We just got to be go, 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 and reacting and responding and doing. And sometimes in times like these, we need to settle that doing urge down, settle that overactivity down, and just sink into the moment. All right. So before we jump in, we're going to do things a little bit different today because we have a lot of people who may be new to us. And we're just going to take a second to introduce ourselves in case you've never actually been on an experience with us. So I'm Charlie Gilkey. I am the author of Start Finishing and the Small Business Life Cycle. I do a lot of the writing at Productive Flourishing. I am a coach who helps people finish the things that matter. That could be organizations that need some strategy execution support, or it could be individuals who just want to stay focused and aligned in doing what matters most to them. Also a podcaster and teacher and speaker. So I do all the things. And I'm just really grateful to be here today to be able to share what we have with you.
Yeah. He's also a former Army logistician. So if you see that piece come out today, you know where that's coming from as well. And I'm Angela Wheeler. I am the co-founder of Productive Flourishing and Charlie's wife and business partner. And my background is in sociology. I have a doctorate in sociology with an emphasis in social psychology. So I take the studies that I've done in my lifetime and apply them to our work now, helping individuals and teams to really sink into what their power place is and be able to bring that into their life and their work. I do clarity coaching, facilitation, speaking, and a lot of different things here around PF.
All righty, so that's who we are.
Yes.
Jumping right in. What we wanted to do is really acknowledge the realities of what's going on. I know it can sometimes be overwhelming, but also really important to say, here's what's going on. Here's what we're going through together, and here are the challenges in front of us. So we're going to jump into that.
Yeah, as Charlie said, there's a lot happening in the world today that is just completely out of our control. And for a lot of us, that lack of certainty, that lack of control produces a lot of anxiety. And whether you're feeling it in the background and you're sensing that anxiety out in the world, or you're feeling it here in the foreground and it's really present in your minute to minute and day to day right now, we just want to take this first few minutes to recognize that that is our reality right now. And there's absolutely no shame in that. And we don't expect you to be able to check your anxiety at the door. That's not a healthy place to be coming from. And so we acknowledge that, we see that that is happening in the world. And that's a big part of the reason why we're here today, is to see if there's just one little thing that we can offer you to be able to walk away with today. Part of that anxiety, what's going on for us, is there's just so much uncertainty. As well, those services, those things that we're used to having just at the touch of our fingertips, for many of us, they're gone. We can't go into restaurants or bars anymore. Our healers, our body workers, our massage therapists, our doctors, our acupuncturists, our gym instructors are not available. And so these things that we typically go to that are normal in our life are currently not available for a lot of us.
There's also the pandemic news cycle that just comes at you. And whether it's through social media, whether it's through private text messages, whether it's through the news apps that you're getting, it just seems like every hour there's some new thing going and there's some new rise and something else is shut down. And so it creates that general anxiety of what's next, what's coming. Oh, I can't do that. And the pulse of the news can be really overwhelming as well. And depending upon where you are, your government services may not be keeping up with public needs. There's asymmetry in who's getting access to care, who's not getting access to care. And that's really stressful.
Yeah. And another thing that is just important to point out and acknowledge is that this is serious. It is. And each of us is responsible for slowing the progression of what is going on. I am not an epidemiologist. I am not a healthcare worker. I cannot tell you about the statistics and all these specific things that you need to do or think about. But what I can say is that each one of us is responsible for how we're going to behave in this situation.
And last thing, another piece of this general background and anxiety is we don't know how long we're going to be in this state. We could be here for a month, it could be 3 months, it could be 9 months. And so as we're talking today about some of the changes and some of the suggestions that we have, I want you to be keeping in mind that it may not be just something that you can put off for 2 weeks and things are taken care of. You might need to be prepared to be working from home from the long term. You may need to be prepared to have a bigger support network than you're used to, just because this could be going on for quite a while. Alrighty. Now, one of the major differences, obviously, and mostly why many of you are here, is we're working from home right now, and that creates all sorts of different challenges and opportunities. So challenges and opportunities. So we're just going to talk about some of the things that are different about working from home. And what people come to me over and over again in saying is that I just can't work from home. I'm too distracted. There's too much going on. And what I really want us to think about is the reason why we're so distracted at home is actually because at home we have many different competing priorities that hit us all at once. So when you're at work, when you're at the office, you're not necessarily thinking about the laundry. You're not necessarily thinking about what's in the fridge. You're not, necessarily worried about whether your kids are, sticking something somewhere where they shouldn't be as far as outlets and stuff goes, right? You're not worried about a lot of those things. But when you're at home, the responsibilities of being a parent and being a partner and being, maybe a child that's taking care of an elder, all of those responsibilities and priorities are manifest. And so we get tugged in so many different directions. Oh, and also there's Netflix and there's YouTube and there's video games. And so I want us to shift the conversation about being distracted to being aware of the competing priorities that are tugging at us, because I think it can help us to see, like, wait a second, that urge to watch Netflix isn't because I'm, say, lazy or I can't work or I'm a procrastinator. It could just be that I've had enough pushing and I just need to veg out a little bit. And my go-to is Netflix, but there may be something better than that.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about that too.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that can be different for people, especially if you're not accustomed to working from home and you don't have your social structures in place, is that it can feel very lonely. Right now, especially, we're being told to socially distance from one another. Charlie and I think that, it's better to think about it as physical distancing rather than social isolation and social distancing, because we are able to connect in different ways with people today, like we are here on this webinar. So it's important to be aware of any loneliness you might be feeling, and we're going to help you here in just a little bit with perhaps some simple steps to help you to feel a little less isolated.
As a sidebar, if you've never been on one of our presentations or read any of our work, we always want to take a look at the landscape before we just jump right into something. And we also want to look at some of the root causes. And so we're going a little bit slower here at the beginning because we find that looking at the landscape and looking at root causes helps people make better solutions for themselves than randomly trying to apply some tip or hack that doesn't really fit their context. So quick sidebar there. One of the major changes about working from home is that your routines and your structures are changed, right? You don't get into the car, drive to work, and do that on the way home as well. Now, there are a lot of benefits for that, but many of us don't recognize how many routines that we have, how much structure we have based around, say, getting up and going to work and getting the kids' lunch boxes ready, and then, taking a break at lunch, and then taking, a break at the end of work and coming home. Those routines and structures make your day pass in certain ways, and it also makes them coherent in certain ways. And when we lose those, it can be really disorienting. So we're going to talk about some ways to recreate some structures. Another thing about working from home, and if you see WFH in the presentation, that's a shorthand for working from home, is that it's reading and writing centric. You end up writing a lot of emails, you end up writing a lot of Slack, maybe text messages, and that's great, but many of us are not reading, writing centric. We like to talk things out. We like to get up at a board and draw things. We like to repeat ourselves. We like to be able to jump in, and just being forced to get all your thought giblets into writing and reading can be really, really hard for people. And it feels like, man, I'm spending so much of my day sitting at a computer, typing and putting things out. And the other thing about reading, writing centric work is that it's hard to convey emotional essence with that. So sometimes your writing can be terse, or it can feel like it's anxiety filled. It's just so hard to have that nonverbal component to it. And that leads to some of the feeling of isolation and the lack of belonging, but also just that frustration that you got to get everything. You either have to write it or you have to read it. And sometimes you just want to talk it out or, listen to someone talking.
Yeah. And then, lastly, our expectations around work hours, especially if you are new to working at home in this time. It may be that generally you're at work from 9 to 5, and you're working 8 hours a day. Well, you might actually find that when you put some routines and structures in place from home with your work, you might actually be one of those people who are able to get your work finished faster. And what we don't want to have happen is you finish your work faster, and because you feel like you have to stay on the clock, you wind up sucked into the news cycle or social media or other things that are not feeding your heart and soul. So this is where it's great to have a conversation with teammates, supervisors, bosses, managers, that type of thing, about what those expectations are from your work while you're at home.
So the way forward, what we're going to be talking about today is how to create and maintain boundaries so that you can then set better expectations and communicate them so that you can create structures that support your work and priorities so that you can build and leverage your support team. Ultimately, so that you can be sane and productive at home. That's what we're doing today.
Yeah.
So we're going to start and go through things in that order.
Yeah. So I think one of the most important things to really get grounded in with the place that we are right now in time is the order of priority when it comes to care, and where our attention and our efforts are going. And I am a very strong believer that it has to start with yourself first. So you hear people say all the time, put your oxygen mask on first before you help other people. And now more than ever, that is super important. This is incredibly important for all of us. And especially if you are a leader, whether it's a leader in your home, in your organization, in your community, whatever it might be, people are going to be looking to you and people are going to be depending on you. And so it is crucial that you take care of yourself and you prioritize yourself and what you need to be able to get through this time. Next is loved ones. So take care of yourself first, take care of loved ones, and then your community, whatever that looks like for you, your coworkers, your neighborhood community, your church community, whatever that might be.
And remember, the reason we're talking about this order of priority is, and starting with yourself, is that we don't know how long this is going to be. You can jump into super helper mode and, super person mode for a week, maybe 2, but over the course of a month or 3 months or 6 months, you're going to wear yourself down.
Yeah.
And you can't give other people water when your well is dry. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I want to take a quick detour, and you'll see why, to talk about the difference between interruptions versus distractions. We often conflate these two together, put them together. It's like, I'm interrupted and distracted. Well, 2 different things going on. Interruptions are created by external agents. These are the adults and other people in your life that will, walk into your room and tug on your shirt or say, hey, I need to talk for a second. They're the kids that ask you where the milk is, even though the milk is in the same place it's always been. The pets that get excited about a turkey buzzard or the Amazon delivery person and just go crazy. Like, those are interruptions caused by external agents. Distractions are created and enabled by you. YouTube doesn't run in and tug on your shirt and say, watch me. right? Facebook, social media doesn't do that. Even if it's on your phone, you've enabled your phone to notify you about these things, which means if you have the option to not be distracted and choose to be, that's a choice that you're making. You're choosing to be distracted. So the reason I talk about this is understanding that they require different approaches. Interruptions are largely about communicating boundaries with external agents or creating those boundaries when it comes to pets and other things like that. So communication, boundary setting. Distractions are largely around your focus and how you've crafted your environment to either make you distractible or make you indistractable. And so as you're sitting there, you're like, oh, I keep going to this place. I keep going to that. Again, if it's a distraction, there's something going on within you that's making you crave, desire, or want that. And that's what you need to work on. If it's an interruption, it's created by an external agent, and that's a different conversation. What they share in common is that you have to focus on the entry point. Once you're distracted or interrupted, you're already fighting an uphill battle for your attention. By the time you're making that second click out of YouTube or Facebook, your focus has shifted, your heart space has shifted, everything has shifted. And so what you want to do is fight that first click, fight that first thing that comes in so you're not fighting that uphill battle. Similarly, when you're interrupted, by the time you're interrupted and you're in that conversation, whatever you had going on before then is probably gone, right? And so focusing on the entry point. So for instance, a door is a entry point. So if you have a room where you're working and you dedicate that room to working, you can set up good boundaries so that, like, if there's a sock or a hat on the door, that people don't knock, or they wait until the time that you say that you're going to be available for interruption, unless it's an emergency. So think about those different boundaries and entry points. And again, when you're interrupted, that can be frustrating, but it can also be just where we are with everything going on, and maybe you need to lean into that. When it's a distraction, that's really your own agency and your own sovereignty that we need to work on there.
And a bit more about boundaries. I want to remind you, as we're going through this, that we really are looking at kind of the 30,000 foot view here. And we're not going to go into incredible detail on all of these. There are resources that we've put here on the slides. So any of these things that you want to go into more and learn more about, you're definitely able to do that. And I really wanted to say that here with the boundaries piece, because setting and maintaining boundaries is challenging for all of us. So you're not alone. There are more resources. We have them for you, because we're going to kind of glide through these a little bit here. One of the things that's important to really think about here and to really wrap our heads around are these misconceptions around boundaries, that they are things that push people away. Or, for example, that story that if I set this boundary, they're going to feel unloved, or they're going to feel like I don't have time for them. When in fact, the opposite is actually true. If you think about people in your lives who have very lovingly set boundaries and have explicitly stated what those boundaries are and why they're so important, you know where you fall in their life. You know that your relationship with them is important because they're making time for you and they're doing it intentionally. And so the biggest thing with boundaries is the recognition that they enhance our relationships. They do not take away from them. Whenever you're able to very clearly state what a boundary is, other people know what to expect from you. It can drop the anxiety, and it can drop those miscommunications, those hurt feelings and things like that. So again, there's more about boundaries. They are more important than ever right now, because our lives have really, for some more than others, just kind of been thrown up, and things are landing in all these different places that we may not have expected to them to land. And so really taking some time to think about what your boundaries are and who you need to share those with is super important. And lastly, you have to be proactive about them. You can't expect for people to read your mind. Although I've wanted Charlie to be able to do that for me before, we have learned that's just not a fair expectation of anybody. And so it's incredibly important to own the boundaries and to proactively share them with the people that need to know about them.
I'm going to extend boundaries just a little and introduce the idea of positive boundaries. A lot of times when we think about negative boundaries, we're just thinking about the ways in which we're pushing people or things away. But positive boundaries are the opposite. They're when you make space for something. And we have to have this dance between negative boundaries of shutting some things out and positive boundaries to bring some things in. And this is where, when Angela was talking about it enhances relationship, if someone has made a positive boundary to spend time with you or spend the afternoon with you or to go on a virtual coffee date and they honor that boundary, there's a sense of love and generosity and belonging that happens when they maintain that positive, or when they express and maintain that positive boundary. And so it's not just about telling people, no, go away, I don't have time for you. It's also about saying, I have made this time for you that is only for you, is only for this particular activity that we want to do with each other. And it can be incredibly gratifying and incredibly good for the heart. So we're talking about work real quick. And so I'll go into boundaries that you may need to set with your coworkers. And so if you're a new adult working from home, this is new for you because your boundaries are actually, when you're at work, either not so great because people can interrupt you and just poke into your office, or they're pretty well defined because you're in other meetings and things like that. When you're working from home, not only do you have your coworkers and the traditional sort of people who want your attention, you might also have kids, you might also have, aging adults or at-risk adults, or you might have other adult workers who are at home too. And so now you're having all of these different people interacting with your time and maybe changing your time and your plans on the daily. So you really have to go through and think, okay, when are my working hours going to be? Or have they been dictated by my company, or do I set them up myself? Once you know that, it can be, okay, communicating with your kids, your partners, and your other teammates about when you're going to be on, when you're going to be off, how you're going to be contactable. Maybe you need to take some moments and get off of Slack and email, but you need to tell your teammates, text me during these periods because I'm going to be out for a walk, but I'm still interruptible. So you just really have to go through there. And unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly what boundaries to set with all of these different people because it's really going to depend upon your current context. Another thing that I want you to think about is extending deadlines. You may not be working at the same capacity, same rate as you're used to. It may take you a few weeks to get your legs under you, or to Angela's point earlier, you may be working a lot faster because you're not commuting, you're not having people poke their head in to see what's going on. So extending or renegotiating deadlines. Just because you think you can move faster on it, don't pull a deadline forward, because again, what that does is makes it harder for you to be flexible and adaptable tomorrow when something else changes. So as a general rule, I encourage people to think more about extending deadlines than pulling them forward. And if you're working from home and you have kids, you have your partners working from home, it's really, really important to let them know how and when you will spend time with them, because the anxiety that people are feeling, we're all feeling it. And so that means kids are going to need more time and attention from you. They're scared and they want to be with you. You're at home, they're used to you being at home, meaning that you're with them and you're interacting with them. So you can't just tell them like, no, go away. You have to say, in 3 hours, we'll be able to go to the park, right? That's our example of setting a boundary. Or, at 5, I'll be able to play Mario Kart with you, but I'm working right now. I mean, we understand that kids at different levels of cognition and language may be able to understand that or not able to understand that. But the important thing is that you express that positive boundary of when you are going to spend time with them so that they can count on that. And then the important thing is, if you say you're going to do it, do it. And I know that's really common sense, but a lot of times we don't follow that common sense.
Absolutely. So another example that is pertinent right now for a lot of people around building and maintaining boundaries is interaction with aging and high-risk elders. So there are a lot of elders in our society today, a lot of baby boomers and older. And there are things that we have to know, especially for those that we are responsible for or in some way in relationship with. And one of those is the biggest is who is taking care of their basic needs. It might be that you used to visit your dad in the nursing home 3 times a week, but that's not possible right now. The nursing home has been shut down from having visitors. And there's obviously going to be some anxiety there for you as well as for your parent. And so this is where communication is so very important. Can you FaceTime with them? Can you use Skype with them? You might need to communicate with the person at the retirement home or the nursing home about helping them to use technology they may not already be comfortable with. So it takes patience. It can take really good communication as well. And then also, if necessary, only you know this because you know your parents, you know the elders in your life, you might need to be their news filter and their guide on what is happening with COVID and how they need to respond to the situation. If they are spending a lot of time during the day in front of televisions and they're just on this constant news cycle, fear is just coming in all day, every day, and their whole world has changed. And so you might need to be a part of helping them to filter what is important and necessary to know and what precautions do they need to have in place. And then, what is just too much. Another example is of dealing with kids who may be at home now. I myself have not kept up with all the latest that's going on in the news. I've created that boundary for myself just because I needed to. And so I don't know how many of you have kids at home. I think it's a lot of you, is my understanding, because I do have a lot of family in school systems around the States. So a lot of you have kids who are at home right now who would typically be in school. And these kids are, they've been taken out of their normal day-to-day structure and routines and what that usually looks like. And whether or not you have the news on in your house or how much you're talking about what's going on with COVID, children, just like everyone else, they feel that emotional contagion that is out there. They feel the anxiety. They know things are different. And so it's super important to have open communication with them. And of course, as an adult, you know what that level should be depending on your child and their development. But open communication about what's going on, how you're feeling. They can sense it, this. And trying to work with them to create a structure that puts a little bit of sanity and routine back in their day and yours. So we like to talk about feeding their heart, their head, and their hands. So maybe you sit down if your children are old enough and you create a structure together. That can be a beautiful bonding moment for you and your family to create a structure where you're letting them know what needs to happen with you and your day-to-day and your work, and you're integrating them and their needs into it. And, Charlie already mentioned this, but letting them know what will be different for you. If they don't normally see you working from home, they need you to be explicit about what those expectations are.
So what's really important throughout these times is to express and adjust expectations. And it reminds me of, I'm paraphrasing Richard Rohr here, but it's the root of suffering comes from unrealistic expectations. The root of suffering comes from unrealistic expectations. We're living through a turbulent time. So things are going to be bumpy. That's just what it is. Plans are going to go awry. What you set, your intentions for next week, you may need to be super flexible with that. And what that means is, yes, change your plans, but it's really about being comfortable with your expectations and being loose with some of those, right? Not saying you don't have any, but maybe if, you're in a place where you just need to win today, that's the expectation, win today. I'm not going to worry about tomorrow. I'm not going to worry about everything. I'm just winning today. So just understand that these expectations, or the expectations that you have of yourself about what you're normally able to do, what your normal looks like, are going to be different, and it's going to be turbulent. So it's not a really great time for the control freaks among us to let that aspect of ourselves do so much of the driving. And even if you're doing your best with all of the suggestions thus far and the ones that to come, you will hit road bumps. You will hit road bumps. And as you're going along, a far better question than some version of does this fit my plan or how do I adjust my plan is what matters now? What matters now? And really being in tune with that, with yourself, and staying in tune with that is a far better pathway forward when it looks for sanity and productivity and great expectations than always trying to make reality fit your plans when it refuses to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And proactive communication, obviously you can see how this just melds very well with the discussion on boundaries. But being proactive about what your expectations are, as well as being flowful, is going to prevent a lot of frustration, resentment, and potentially shame, because the last thing we need on top of the anxiety and the fear and the uncertainty is to add shame as another layer, because we're not hitting our goals, or we're not meeting our expectations for ourselves, or our teammates aren't. So really adjusting those expectations and proactively communicating and letting the people in your life know, whether it's your partner or your teammates, wow, this came up today, which I wasn't expecting. I'm going to have to take care of my grandkids because, my daughter is supposed to go into work and we thought she was going to be laid off. So keep those communication lines open and really let people know what you're needing and what's happening in your life.
Yeah, real quick on this. Frustration, anxiety, and shame are some dominant emotions that we can feel through periods like this. And the thing about those is that they can set up meta chains where you can be shamed that you're ashamed.
Yeah.
And then you can have another layer on that. So you end up in this sort of shame spiral, right? Same thing with anxiety. You can get anxious and you can get anxious about being anxious, and it sets up an anxiety spiral. And frustration is the same way. You can get frustrated with yourself about being frustrated with something. And so we can layer a lot of this on top of. So the more that we can make our day smoother, the more that we can be proactive communication or have proactive communication, the more likely that we're going to prevent some of these spirals of shame, frustration, and anxiety. All right. So just a reminder, we have a lot of resources about structures and routines. And as I was talking to Angela about this, I was like, well, this whole slide could be a presentation, but we're not going to do that today. We have all sorts of resources at the end. We have plenty of other support materials on this. So this is going to be an overview. I'm telling myself that as much as I'm telling you that. One of the major differences, as I mentioned earlier, is that your structures and routines are off. Regardless of whether you were conscious of it, you had a pre-work, a lunch, and a post-work routine when you were working from the office. When you're working from home, those things kind of evaporate. You don't get up and make lunch for yourself. You don't pack a lunch because you're not going to work. Or maybe you don't pack a lunch for your kids because they're not going to school. The important point here, or one important aside here, is that so many of our routines are actually movement based. So we're making a lunch, and our brains and our bodies are able to organize the day through the activities that we do. So when we lose those somatic rituals that we have every day, we also lose some of the ways in which we ground ourselves. Don't think about it that much, but that's actually one of the things that's happening. So what you need to do to create a day that works for you is to recreate or alter your pre-work, lunch, and post-work routine. Pre-work could be, maybe you still get up and make yourself lunch and you pack it in the fridge. And then when it's lunchtime, you don't have to like worry about what you're going to eat and go through that sort of swirl, because the last thing we need is more anxiety and more decision fatigue. Oh, pause. I forgot to talk about decision fatigue. Routines and structures help limit decision fatigue, also help limit emotional fatigue. That's why we want to set them back up. And so just that small thought of figuring out what you're going to eat for breakfast and then figuring out what you're going to eat for lunch and how long it's going to take and things like that, it just adds to the compression, as opposed to getting up, making yourself lunch for the day, putting it in the fridge, going to work for a few hours, and then having a lunch or midday break or mid-work day break, where you go eat that lunch, get away from your devices, get away from your computers, check in, have some personal time, go back to work, and then have your post-work routine, the way that you shut down your computers, the way that you, log out of work. All those things are important, because if you're not careful, and many of you, I hear some of you about to nod, if you don't have that post-work routine, the afternoon sort of slides into the evening, sort of slides into the night, and you're not really working and productive, but you're kind of on, and no one is really getting what they need. You're not getting what you need as a person. Your team is not getting the teammate they need. Your family is not getting that. So as best you can, if your normal hours were 8 to 5, recreate 8 to 5, modify your pre-work, your lunch and post-work routine so that you have that sense of stability. The other reason you want to do that is few things are more overwhelming than a full day that doesn't have any structure for a lot of us. What do you do? How do you make decisions about that? When you have a pre-work, lunch, and post-work routine, it divides your day up into 2 major work blocks that then you could chunk down to the smaller pieces. Okay, now that I'm talking about blocks, I'll talk about the 4 kinds of blocks that is really helpful to use to build your day. I have to be super brief here because I promised Angela and you that I would be. 4 types of blocks. Focus blocks are when you get in and you do your best work. It's when you do your creative heavy lifting, or you're in a project that requires your brain space to be on it for quite a bit of time. Those are 90 to 120 minutes. Social blocks are blocks when you're the best version of human and or you're meeting with other people. So if you have team meetings, if you have check-ins, all those go into social blocks. Again, those tend to be 60 minutes to 90 minutes, because you got to think it normally takes 15 minutes to stand up, 15 minutes of outro after those meetings. Admin blocks. These are 30 to 60 minute longs where you get in, you do email, you're on Slack, you're making, those quick phone calls, you're scheduling appointments, or more likely listening to voicemails about your appointments being rescheduled. And then lastly are recovery blocks. And these are where you have self-care, self-maintenance, lunch goes in there, meditation, exercise, chasing kids and animals around the house. Those are recovery blocks, and those are really variable. Those 4 blocks go a long way to putting structure to your day. So going back to pre-work, lunch, and post-work routine, you can kind of see between your pre-work routine and lunch, you might have space for, say, 2 focus blocks to really get in there. And it's super easy to say, okay, or it's simpler to say, okay, with this block of time, what specific project am I going to be working on? You get into it, you get out of it, you switch to another one. Or maybe you have a focus block in the morning and then you have a team check-in at, say, 10 o'clock. Okay, that's a social block. So just putting those in there can turn this amorphous day into a much more structured and organized day. It tends to be that focus blocks and recovery blocks are critical, and they can be the hardest to firewall at home. Focus blocks because you need to limit distractions and interruptions to actually have a fruitful focus blocks. And recovery blocks because a lot of times you don't have the gym, you don't have the workout equipment, maybe you don't have a meditation space. Maybe you have other people around you that as soon as you come out of your office, or as soon as you take your headphones off, they start bombarding you with requests. So those 2 kinds of blocks can be really hard, but they're also the critical ones. So if you take one thing away from this sort of structure slide and thinking about structure, it's how and where am I going to put my focus blocks and recovery blocks into my schedule, okay? I'm looking at time, I have to be briefer here. Make your environment work for you, meaning if you have a room that's particularly distracting and pulling at your attention and you can't get into it, instead of fighting with your environment for maybe weeks or months, alter your environment to make it work for you. So maybe it's time to put the TV in the closet for a while, so that you can actually get in that room and work, and decide to watch in another room. If there are a lot of other distractions in the area, maybe it's time to move those. And if it's a shared space, a kitchen, a living room, talk to your housemates and make sure that that's okay. Don't just arbitrarily move stuff and then leave other people who may have needed that for their certainty anchors left hanging. Lastly, consider device-free zones or device storage places for when you're intentionally off. So for instance, Angela and I, we have a cubby in our kitchen where our iPhones go when we come in the house. We don't need them in the house. We don't have them on us most of the time. So we come in the house, we put the iPhones in the cubby. When we want to check text messages or check voicemails, we go to the cubby, get the phone out, do what we need to do, put it back in there. What this does for us is it makes sure that we're not distracted and interrupted in every room of our house, and we're constantly, looking at that. So I know I covered a lot really briefly here. We'll have links in the resources if you want to go in further on that one, but I want to give you an overview. Again, 2 things: focus blocks, recovery blocks can really help create structure to your day. I think I got through that on time.
You did. Good job.
That was kind of an okay. All right. Let's go.
It was a lot to cover.
There's a lot to cover. I can breathe now.
Yes.
It's your turn.
Oh,
no, it's my turn still. Intentional digital minimalism. The sort of subtext here is limit your social media, limit your news. I was going to say get off of news and social media, but that may not work for you. The real question here is how much exposure to the news and social media supports you? How many times do you look at the news and social media and actually feel better? Most of us, not often, right? Other thing is, do you need to be checking it first thing? What's it going to change in your day? And I'll be brief here, but for some of you, that the news and the social media are kind of like psychic poison. Why are you consuming poison first thing in the day if you know it's not working for you? Okay. So can you check it once a day at the end of the day and get the amount of actual information you need versus picking up on everything else that we're picking up through news and social media?
yeah. And just remember too that it doesn't matter if you identify as an intuitive person or an empathic person. I believe we all have those to some degree. Some of us are more tuned in than others. But it's incredibly important to remember that while you're picking up the news and you're getting that information, you're also getting that emotion that's behind it. Emotional contagion is a real thing. And so you're picking up more than just the information whenever you're going to a source, whether it's social media or the news or the newspaper, whatever it is. Just be aware of what that is doing for you internally.
And lastly, it's not about completely avoiding the news and social media, but moderating your use in a way that supports you, that supports your family, that supports your community. And if you need to change that, then remember the news and social media are not going to write a check for you that says, please stop paying attention, right? You have to do that for yourself. Okay.
So a few alternatives, if you're kind of, if you know that the news cycle is feeding you in ways that are not healthy, and you're really you're wanting to break that urge, that addiction, whatever it is for you, some different things to think about. One of the most important for me in my day-to-day life is actually meditation. You can think of it as centering prayer, as, conscious awakening meditation, whatever you call it, whatever you want to think about it as. Meditation can be incredibly supportive at this time. And one of the barriers to meditation prayer for some people is I just can't sit still for that long. And so I just want to tell you that being able to do this for 30 seconds makes a difference. A minute makes a difference. So a short pause here and again throughout the day. Movement. Most of us do not have to stay in our homes. We can get outside. Yes, we have to be careful about who we're in contact with and where, and try to keep physical distance. But movement is incredibly important, whether it's small movements throughout the day as you're working at your desk. You get up every 15 minutes, you walk around the table, you stretch and touch your toes, and you sit back down. Or if it's a walk around the block, whatever that looks like for you. For me, yoga is incredibly supportive at this time. Affirmations can also be incredibly supportive right now. And these are just positive things that you tell yourself that can kind of help move you into a better headspace. In fact, I just want to share a little one that came to me this morning. It's a longer affirmation. It's more of almost like a meditative prayer of some sort that came to me this morning as I was thinking about preparing for today's call. And that is, I bring my fear into the light with compassion and understanding so that I and the universe can transform it into right action and right being. I do not shame myself and my fear, as I know that grows it. Only by bringing it into the light can I come to the holy balance of wisdom in action and acceptance of when I must let go. So just, an example of that, things that can be helpful. And then, one-on-one check-ins with your loved ones and support team. We are going to talk in a little more detail about how to set this up for yourselves. But I would say with this one, make sure that it's people who fill your cup and who you're able to help fill their cup as well. And you're not just trading anxieties with each other. You can talk about your fear and anxiety, but you don't want to amp it up.
Yeah. And I can be brief here. As a quick exercise for you to do off of this webinar is to think of 15 nourishing activities that can be done in 15 minutes or less. You could probably do this in 15 minutes. The reason I want you to focus on this is if you don't have an alternative to your digital default, it can create a lot of anxiety and frustration and shame because you don't know what to do, right? If you have this quick checklist, you can jump in there and you can do it in 15 minutes. And what I find is that 15 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 to 15 minutes is where we don't really know what to do. We can't commit to something else. And the urge comes to check and to see what's going on. And then we end up in a spiral when we really need those 15 minutes for a breather. We really need those 15 minutes for nourishment. So that's why I want to do that. 15 nourishing activities. You can do this in 15 minutes or less. I know because I've taught this in workshops and it can be really powerful. As a pro tip, do those 15, highlight 3 that are just your default goes-tos so that you're not always stuck into paralysis about what to do next. Okay. I don't know what I did. Okay.
So working from home can be surprisingly lonely, especially if it's new to you. So again, it's just the acknowledgement that things are different, things have changed. Maybe the support structures you typically have changed overnight. And so acknowledge that that is a reality, and let us help you help yourself making this a little bit easier.
So help me, help you.
Help me, help you, help you, help me.
Yeah, something like that.
Yes.
So although the social distancing is a term being used in the news, we both hate it because it's actually physical distancing, and the subtle message is that we need to be getting away from people. But yes, we need to be physically distanced from people, but we still need to be connected. We still need to be checking in. We still need human bonding and belonging. So whenever you realize that you're socially distancing, maybe think, no, I need to be physically distanced, but there are different ways that I can check in with my support team. Different ways that I can be in community with other people.
Yeah. And so we really encourage you to really think about who your support team is right now. And this number could look different for everyone. I feel that, 2 to 5 people who are able to best support you and you them during this time is a great place to start in the way of support team. It could be your partner. It might be your best friend. It could be your mom. It could be a brother. It could be a neighbor. What I do want to say, though, is what you need to remember with this support team is these are people who are going to help uplift you during this time and help you stay as sane as you can be. And so there may be people in your life who you love dearly, family members, friends, whatever it might be. And it may be that they are not the best person to be on your support team at the moment. I'm not saying you have to isolate yourself from them, but you may need to be very careful about how and when you engage with them.
I guess the point here is to be clear about when you're checking in for them and when you're checking in for you. Because I think a lot of frustration and resentment and feeling unseen can happen when you're checking in for you, but the person on the other end thinks that you're checking in for them and they never really ask you how you're doing. So your support team, part of it is, yes, you're checking in for them, but also you're checking in for you as well. And a really important point here is to talk to them about the how you're going to do it after you talk about what you actually need. The how, like, hey, can we check in every day via text message? That's great. But really, what are you needing? What type of communication, what type of love do you need from those engagements is a far more important and unfortunately more difficult conversation than just, can we check in every day? Because you might find that you start your daily check-in and it becomes yet another thing because you're actually not getting what you need. So talk about what you need first, then talk about how you're going to communicate with each other. What before how. Okay. And just some quick possibilities here. Maybe it's a short daily check-in via video, FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, however you need to do it. And remember, this could be a teammate. This could be a coworker as well, that buddy that you just bounce stuff off of, right? They could be part of your support team and check in too. And remember, not all of your meetings have to be about work. It could just be about how you're doing and what's going on with your mom and what, how your new kittens are doing, because life goes on throughout the rest of this and we need to share those. It could be a quick text message of love or how's it going? What's going on? What's up? Or it could be sharing a favorite hopeful song, right? Of just like I shared with our team, John Legend's We Need Love song, which is one of my favorite new songs. And so I shared it with the team. And it's just, we need hope, we need heart, and we need togetherness right now. And sort of just touching in with each other. Okay, but you can come up with your own ways. So wrapping things up.
So we're living in a turbulent time right now, and we need to be intentional. We need to be aware, but we also need to continue to be flexible because things are going to continue to change, maybe minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. So build the structures that you can. Be intentional, but allow for change.
We talked so much about boundaries. Are we led with boundaries? Because without boundaries, it's hard to set up structures and routines. And so much of what we look at the distraction or interruption or procrastination challenges are actually priority and boundary challenges. So whenever you're not sure what to do, the real point is for you to check in with your priorities. What matters now? What can I do today? What's a realistic expectation? And then what boundaries do I need to set up? And then work from the bottom towards, different ways that you need to do it. And just remember, structures and routines make the work and days a lot easier to make your day successful, just because it lowers decision fatigue. It lets you know what's realistic for you. And it gets you to a place where you kind of know where things start and end. And right now we need the certainty of structures and routines with all of the uncertainty going on in the world.
Yeah. And build your support team. Being part of at least one also, this is going to help us stay sane, productive, and hopeful. And we need hope right now.
We need hope. Next steps.
So be kind, be brave, and be gentle.
Okay. And then we hope that you take 30 to 60 minutes in the next 2 days to start putting things in place from this talk, putting in some boundaries, reworking your routines, reworking your structures, talking to your teammates about what you need, and creating a support team.
And lastly, we hope that you will share this with other people who you believe might need it at this point. Remember that at the end of this, we have a lot of links to resources that allow you and others to go deeper into any of these materials. And our team is just an email away as well. Jess can drop that support email into the chat window, but share and help one another.
Yeah, we wanted to cover this groundwork today because we have a lot of how-to, like nitty-gritty resources available on the website. And so if you have a question, you want to reach out, go to the email address that Jess is going to give. But we also have all of these resources. Again, these are in the keynote that you're going to get. They're also, or that you already got, they're also going to be in the email that we're going to send you with the recording for this. And this recording is going to end up as a blog post on the Productive Flourishing website. So you'll be able to find other things. We're here to help. Over the last decade and change, we created a lot of resources around staying productive and staying sane. So mostly what we're trying to do right now is curate what we have and tailor it for you, because we don't need to create a whole bunch new, but you might be new to us, or you may need to see some of these old things that we talked about in the new light because of COVID. We're going to open it up for Q&A now.
Yep, Steve is going to be our wonderful help and curator for questions today.
Awesome. Let me just 1 second, pull up our first. So we've got two related questions that I'm going to tie into. Andy has a question about he's working from home and in social isolation because he's in a high-risk group, and most of the rest of my team is still working in our office for the time being. I feel less busy at home than I would normally be at work, and I feel a little bit out of sight, out of mind. So how can I keep as a part of the team without annoying the hell out of them? So that's the first part of it. And Lisa's kind of piggybacking on that question, and she's saying, I worry that I'm not doing enough or missing important issues by not being physically present. She's on email all the day, but can't shake the feeling that without the in-person contact, that she's dropping the ball. So those are.
So this is where coming up with a great daily plan is useful. We have a lot of resources. If you look in the chat, Jess is probably going to be dropping a bunch of other things that come up from this. What I would say, and this is for both of you, is starting the day thinking about like, what are the 1, 2, or 3 really important rocks of a project that I'm going to work on today, and really listing those. And, if there are a few other emails that you need to do, and then that's something that I would suggest providing as a daily wrap up for both of you. It's like, here's what I finished today. And yes, you may be able to have, do that in Asana or whatever work management software that you use, but it's useful for you to have a running log. And it can be as super simple as a Google Doc, where just every day you write down the 3 like major rocks of your project that you push forward, or what major work that you've done. So that's what I would say on that one. What we want to do during these times is just be very clear about the work that you're going to do for the day. We have our momentum planners. There are free versions available on our free planners page that walk through how to do this. But yeah, few things are more anxiety producing and frustrating than just feeling like you've worked all day, but you can't really show anything for it. It's frustrating for us, but it's also can make us feel weird with our team. So definitely put down what you're going to work on today, do your best you can to get it done, and then report that at the end of the day. Not from a bragging, like, here, look at me, look at how awesome I am, although that's you, do you. But more like hey, here's what I worked on today. Because remember, your teammates, the way I talk about virtual or about remote working is it's kind of like you're playing, say, football, but no one can see each other, right? So they don't know when you've thrown the ball and who's caught it and where you've thrown the ball. So you got to say, hey, I've got it, I've caught it, I'm running here, or hey, this is as far as I've taken it. Someone else needs to help me here, because they can't see the work in the same way. So you just have to be more communicative about those, and saying what you've done daily is a really good way of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would add to that. I feel like I heard in those questions also a little bit about how you stay connected with the people that you generally are in person with day to day. And so those relationships are important, and hopefully before too long, you're going to be able to be there with them again in person. But I would ask you to check in with who you can on your team about ways that you can stay connected to them, even if it's just like once a day you have a 5-minute check-in during lunch or something like that, just to sit and see each other's faces, say hello. It may be that you need to do more face-to-face via Zoom or Skype or some other technology to work on things in real time, perhaps. I know sometimes our team and, or Charlie and I, we just realize like, oh, hey, we're going back and forth here on Slack. Let's just, we're all available right now. And instead of doing this back and forth via text, let's get on this call together and hash it out and work it out together in real time. So I don't know the specifics of your work environment. However, if there is someone you can reach out to, even for just that small connection, it would be really helpful for you and probably them as well, because they're used to you being there as well.
Yeah, I'm encouraging many of my clients to talk to their teams about doing daily stand-ups where there's 15 to 20 minutes where the whole team checks in via video. And everyone's on video, so just because you have one person that's at home, they're not left out of the loop. So maybe doing a daily check-in is a good way of doing it. And again, we're talking 15 to 20 minutes of your day, not the hour-long meeting that doesn't go anywhere. And the 15-minute check-in, yes, it's about getting work done, but the subtext under that is you're here, we see you, we miss you, like we're still in this together, and that can get lost in working from home.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for that question.
Great questions. What's next, Steve?
You touched on this a little bit, but I think it bears kind of maybe a little more elaboration. So Stephanie has, how can we support our kids whose routines are so changed right now?
Yeah. Such a great question. I want to go back to a few of the things that I mentioned earlier, and that is depending on the age of the children, each parent knows this the best for themselves, is really sitting down with the kids and letting them know what the reality is, not in a scare way, but kids are super smart and perceptive, and they're picking up on the anxiety, even if we're not sharing it openly. And so sitting down with them, talking with them to whatever extent cognitively it works, this. And I really, really encourage you actually, if they're at that age where it's possible, to create the structure together. So if you're able to sit down and look at like, oh, these are what our days look like. And normally you go to school at this time. And so we usually have a 15-minute ride in the car together at this time. So how about here at home for 15 minutes, we read a story together. Subbing in those things that are meaningful to the child. And again, as a parent, you know that better than I do. But subbing in things that might normally be happening at that time with something that helps them really stay present and connected can be super helpful right now.
Yeah, and again, use your resources and what works for you better. But like, if you had that 15-minute ride to school every day, maybe consider jumping in a car and driving for 15 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, kids may not be able to fully articulate what's going on, but there's something about them being in the car seat and you talking about what they're going to do for the day that may just work. Mm-hmm. And if it just works, we're at a time where we need to focus on what works, not necessarily changing everything. And so that's what I would, encourage you to think about. Or maybe it's a walk around the block where they can do the same thing. So absolutely. Recreate those. And there are a lot, like Jess, if you'll pull up the thing that Joe sent us yesterday about kids with bugs or bugs with kids or something about bugs and kids. There are plenty of organizations making instructional videos and educational videos for children right now who are at home. And so maybe instead of just watching cartoons, they go to school and they're watching something cool and educational and like that's entertainment, so that they're not just watching cartoons. And if watching cartoons is what needs to happen right now, that's also okay.
Yeah, and one last little thing that comes to mind, and it might be a little more challenging than some other things, but kids are really missing their friends right now, right? And so again, I don't know exactly what it would look like, but maybe there's a way to do virtual play dates with some of their friends, especially for younger kids, right? Preschool, elementary school age. Maybe they can, in your house be playing the same game that their friend is playing in their house together, or they find a way to, play school, or, something like that virtually, to kind of give the kids some ownership of what they're able to do and making things feel a little more normal.
Yeah, and I see a few people bouncing in chat. Jen Laban is one of our resident experts on being a productive powerhouse mom with kids. So she's written some of the resources we've listed on the resources are actually ones that she's written, but she's a good go-to. So if you see her over in the chat, do that, and I might be able to bug her to pull some of these resources together too. So Jen, I'll tap you about that after the webinar. All right, Steve, did that answer the question?
Yep, I think that got it. Next question that we've got is, I think this one is interesting. The problem I have is getting the day started. I find myself wanting to sleep in and have me time and not get started with my work.
You want to start?
Yeah, that might just be okay right now. Obviously I can't speak to your exact situation because I don't know what it is. I don't know if you have to be on at a certain time. If that's the case, that you do have to be online at 8:30 a.m., it may be that you do allow yourself to sleep in a little bit because you don't have the commute that you normally do. So it really is a matter of sensing in with yourself and what your self-care needs are right now. And it might be that you do need an extra 30 minutes to an hour of sleep in the morning. And since you don't have to commute, you don't have to it depends on how much you want to get dressed. Since you don't have to do all the things you might normally do to leave the home, that may very well leave you some extra self-care time in the morning. And whether that is sleeping in, or that's taking some extra meditation time, or it's getting a run in, which you normally can't do until the end of your day, I really want to encourage people to make the best of these really challenging circumstances we're in, that this is an awful, awful time in so many ways. And where can we find the gifts in these challenging times? And a gift may be that you are able to have more self-care right now.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on that. I think a lot of people are dealing with a bit of emotional fatigue that they're not really addressing and owning. And so getting up a little bit later might just be that you're more emotionally fatigued and tired because of the anxiety, the worry, everything else. And so that's another thing. And as she mentioned, if your normal commute is 25 minutes and it takes you 30 minutes to get up and get around, like there's an hour of your day that you can do something different with. And so maybe you don't get up at the same time, or maybe you do it. And two things on this real quick about getting up earlier or troubles getting up in the morning. What I find most people do is that they're watching they have screens on too late the night before. And so if you're looking at a phone or you're watching TV up at 10, 11 o'clock, it's going to take your brain a while to spin down and sleep. So if you want to get up earlier, you need to be shutting down devices earlier. The second thing is that we need to find the ice cream that makes us get up. And by ice cream, I mean that thing that you enjoy, that thing that makes you want to get up and do it, as opposed to the thing that you have to do. So where's some ice cream that you can find in the morning? Like, oh, I get to get up and play guitar for a little bit more, or I get to get up and journal, or I get to do some of those things. It helps in the morning when you're laying there in bed and you're doing the roll around thing, to not be like, oh, I got to get up, to be like, oh, I get to get up and get to do this thing that I might not otherwise get to do. And to Angela's point, I know there's a lot going on right now. I hope we're all looking for the gifts and the goodness that can happen right now. Maybe this is the time where you realize your kids are old enough to be autonomous and start structuring their day, and you didn't realize that because you've been sending them to school the whole time. And you got this new little being in person that's like has plans for the day, and it's pretty awesome, right? Or maybe you find that there's ways that you can work from home with your partner now, and you haven't been able to do that before. So find those moments, because it's always the light and the dark, and there's a lot of light still going on as well.
Absolutely. And, the kind of the last thing I want to say on this point about self-care is that one of the best things that we can all be doing for ourselves right now is a load of self-care. We don't know at this point how COVID is going to affect every different person in the population. And so the things that you can do around extra sleep, healthy sleep, eating well, keeping movement going, keeping your stress as low as possible with meditation, movement, support teams, all of these things are going to help you and help your body to potentially fight whatever it may need to fight. And so self-care is not only important, it's essential right now.
A quick technology note. Some people I just noticed are sending chats to all panelists and not all panelists and attendees. If you want everyone to see it, remember to go to all panelists and attendees in the little drop down window in the chat. If you just want Angela and I to see it, then it's still all panelists. So a quick note there.
Yeah. So we are at 11:15, and this webinar was scheduled to end at 11:15. We talked a little more than we wanted to, but of course we had so much to share. And so I'd like to, acknowledge that we're at time. If you have a hard stop and you need to leave, we will continue to record. And I would like to give us another 10, max 15 minutes to answer a few questions that are still lingering.
Yeah, so if you need to go take care of yourself, thanks for joining us today. We hope this has been helpful. If you want to hang out and vibe with the community a little bit longer and hear questions, we're here for that too. So do what's best for you.
All right, next question, Steve.
Gosh, there's so many good ones. Any special, this is from Allison, any special suggestions for overall dealing with information overload? Emails, information, etc. is starting to come in fast and furiously. The need to stay flexible and shift is increasing. And it sounds like, from my perspective, this is work-related things that increase, as well as all of the information, news media, social, and that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, so I think there's two different axes to think about here. So there's the work axis, which is talking to your teammates about information pulse and what's being sent in, and expectations about how quickly you respond to things. So for instance, you could create a team workway such that from, people can reasonably expect between 11 and noon that people will respond to the emails that were sent this morning, and from 4 to 5, they'll respond to the emails that were sent this afternoon. And that way you can check in only during those times and know that you're not missing anything. And that might just be your admin co-working hours to work on that. So that's conversations with your team leader and team. The current work that I'm really focused on in my next book is about the ways in which we have a lot of influence over our team's workways. And so I'm just going to slide that over, that you probably have a lot of ability to change some of those workways to be more nourishing for yourself. When it comes to the personal side, remember, I'm going to put that into the distraction bucket, not the interruption bucket. So, you can shut news off. In fact, I don't have the news app on my phone. Haven't had it for years. I don't have social media on my phone. I only have email on my phone because I'm still in book launch mode and I travel enough that I need to. And so shut down the notifications, get the news app off of there. What I want you to think about is, like, most of us can wait to get news until we go and get the news. and do that in 15, 20 minutes. And so for a long time, for again, my personal sort of thing, whenever there's been any sort of political news or things like that, I've said, you know what, on Saturday, I'm going to give myself about 30 minutes to read really good articles on that to get up to speed. And then I'm going to go on with my life. I don't need a constant update every day about that. So that's just what I would want you to be thinking about, is batching some of that admin work. I talked about those admin blocks where, you know, you just have like that 10 to 12 or 4 to 5 or whatever works for you. Do it during those times, shut down notifications, everything else. Also set up with your teammates and your loved ones that maybe it's time that if there's something urgent, like truly urgent, they text you, as opposed to it being something that you have to be on email or Slack for. Also can be a really great point.
Absolutely. And I think just one thing I would add with the personal inflow of information is, you know, as Charlie said, stop with the notifications, the constant notifications, because they will be non-ending. And choose one place that you go. If you feel like you need to get updates and news, choose one place, and don't allow yourself to get pulled into the fray over and over and over again in so many different streams.
Hope that helps.
Yeah.
Very good. Next one from Millie. I'm less worried about how to work from home than a lack of work to do. I'm normally very client facing. Without being able to have appointments, it's tough to fill my day.
Yeah. Without knowing what the business is, you're not going to like this one. I'm going to tell you this up front, but in client-facing businesses, we always have the marketing work, we always have the strategic planning work, we always have stuff, we always have the client systems work that we keep meaning to get to, but we don't. Right now is a really good time if you are not meeting with people and there's no way you can meet with people and there's no way you can pivot your services to be virtual, to be working on some of those systems. If you're in the health industry, like I know there's always a backlog of claims and things that you got to do. You get caught up on those. So now's the time, if you can't pivot, to make some of that background work that you keep saying you're going to get to foreground work, and just accept the gift that like right now might be that time where you write the marketing, or where you create the marketing plan, or you write some blog post, or so on and so forth. Yeah. So in business, there's always something to do. There's always something to do. And just right now, some of us are in a forced fallow period. Some of us are like, we have been more busy than ever because we're trying to pivot and do the best we can to serve our audience with what we have. So accept the fallow period, treat it like it's the holidays. Do it holidays, except for you actually have capacity. Okay. Also, depending upon what your business is, you might also just take it as a break, right? Just claim it as a vacation. When's the last time you've actually had a mini sabbatical? When's the last time you've actually had a break? It might just be that you do that for now. And when everybody comes back, you know it's going to be busy. So we rest now, waiting for the peak season.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, I know many of you have already thought of this, but there are a lot of businesses that meet with people, generally in person. But if you were able to take a step back and spend a little bit of time thinking about the work that you do in person with people, you may be able to do some of it or a majority of it actually via Skype or FaceTime or Zoom or something like that. Again, I know that's not for everyone, but you may be able to do more of your work than you realize via technology such as this.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the gifts of what's going on right now is I think it's going to be a tipping point for remote work and virtual services. Meaning that this becomes more of a norm, that we realize like, wait a second, I can see my doctor and I don't have to travel 45 minutes. and then get parking and then do all of that jazz, that can work. Or I don't need to see my therapist on her couch. Like we can still have a phone. Or, I was just talking to a consultant earlier where we had a VIP day scheduled for me in a month. And I was like, can we do this virtually? I don't know if she's done this virtually before, but now we're figuring it out. And I think there's a degree to which we're not going back to the way things were. And so as we start thinking about building sane and productive ways of working from home, again, it may be that this is a long-term thing that we need to embrace and make really awesome as opposed to just survive through. All right, next.
Thank you.
All right, next one. This one, somewhat related, but there's a specific twist on it. So Jennifer is asking about fundraising. How do we work towards objectives when people are so focused on this serious issue and markets are down?
Yeah, that's super hard because we're living in a fear economy right now. And so that's just straight up what's going on. I think part of what happens in fear economies, one, people start hoarding vis-a-vis toilet paper, money, whatever has value, people will hoard. Two, they start punting decisions that are non-necessary, right? So if I don't have to make the decision today, I'm not going to. So what I would be looking at from a fundraising perspective is how do you communicate to your people that the need is still now, regardless of what's going on, your services are going to exist, and maybe the need is even higher now. Two, there's some things like I'm on a board for a nonprofit, and like some of our events we're having to reschedule or cancel. And so our development directors is having to work a bit extra with those personal touch-ins and seeing what's going on. And so I'm not saying it's going to be completely successful, because one of the things of a fear economy is people do tighten their wallets. And so I think it's pivoting, being super clear about the need, why it's now, why it's going to be something that 6 months from now it's still going to be important. Two, changing to more one-on-one fundraising activities. Three, looking at your expense and revenue model such that you encounter that you're maybe 30% down on fundraising, and what needs to shift in your operations and your budget to make that work.
Yeah, I think too, it's really important, especially, for fundraisers right now, that, the organization, the event, the cause, whatever it is that you're fundraising for is likely still very, very important. And it will continue to be so. And so it may be when you're having those one-on-one discussion with donors, that you acknowledge like, hey man, things are hard right now. And there are a lot of people making really tough decisions. Perhaps you're not able to give at the same level you did last year. But is there another level where you still feel like you can give and be a part of this? So really just facing head on and acknowledging that things are scary and tough right now, and reiterating the importance of the mission, and working with them to find that amount where they still feel like they can be a part of things, but also if they're a little afraid and scared, that they're still, protecting what they feel they need to protect.
Yeah, and it's a general sales thing, and we don't like to talk about fundraising as sales, but it is. But don't project that they may not be wanting to spend, because then you're suggesting something that they didn't have. And the two, to Angela's point, like let's say you were going to ask a donor for $500 and they say they can't do that right now. You may be able to say, well, could you do a monthly subscription or a monthly payment of $50 over the next 10 months to keep it going? That way you still have your money, but we're still, can secure that. So I think thinking of different funding and payment models like that could be really useful for people who want to give. They just may not feel like they can give that normal amount right now. Okay, next question. We got one more, I think.
Yeah, it's time for one more question.
All right, last question. So I like this one, so I'm gonna pick it. How do you stop yourself from eating everything in the house? Stress eating plus constant access to food has been a big issue. This is from Miriam.
Yeah.
That's that's a tough one. That, some people may be finding themselves on that continuum, while other people might be finding themselves on the other side of it, where they're so stressed they can't eat. I generally don't have that problem. Sometimes wish I did.
Me too.
But I really see you, and I hear you, and I feel you on that. And you might need to set some things in place that you don't normally have to have in place. One of the things, there's a whole list of things that come to mind for me. One of them is, don't bring the food into the house that is your go-to stress food. If your go-to stress food is an apple, you're probably okay. I don't know a lot of people who overeat apples. It's definitely possible, but don't have that go-to stress food in the house is one of the best things we can do for ourselves. If it is in the house for a reason, perhaps for someone else who's in your family, then it may be that you need to ask them that they put that food somewhere where it's not in your face. It might, I realize this is going to sound incredibly extreme, and it just depends on the situation you're in, but you might need to ask them to lock it away somewhere. If they really and truly need it, and you don't, you might need to ask them to put it somewhere where you don't have access to it. But the best thing you can do is not have it around. And what, a process of being able to check in with yourself when that urge arises. And I know that feeling when that urge arises, to grab the chips or to grab the brownie or, whatever it might be. Can you take a pause and ask yourself, am I hungry? I realize this is a lot easier said than done. But if you can take that pause before you reach and perhaps try to place something else in that moment, it might be that you reach out to one of your support team members. It might be that you take a walk around the block. It might be that instead of reaching for the brownie, even though you really don't want it, you reach for the apple. And perhaps the apple curbs it enough for you that the brownie is not necessary right now. And then last thing I can think of is actually putting Post-it notes on the cabinets, the refrigerator, wherever this might be. If it's in the house, which I really suggest it not be, asking yourself questions. Are you hungry? Why are you reaching for this right now? Whatever is a good and helpful prompt for you.
Yeah. So it's really about choice architecture, in the sense of, if you make it default, you make your default easy, you're going to do it. So if your default is going for brownies, how do you make it harder to get brownies? It also turns out that the foods that are best for us, that's a great one, Dia. Are you hungry or are you bored? That's what I have to ask myself a lot. Am I hungry or am I bored? Or am I stress eating? And if I'm stress eating, what are really good things to do? But the real question that you want to get to is, again, am I hungry or am I bored? Or how can I make this choice that harder for me to do? And there was something else I was going to say. It'll come to me. Oh, most of the foods that are best for us are the ones we don't binge on. Corollary to that, we mostly binge on foods that aren't good for us anyways. And so getting rid of sweets and too many breads removes a lot of the go-tos that people go to, because I don't know too many people who binge on celery or can eat too much, meat, so on and so forth, right? Because our bodies have signals that we've had enough, except for when it comes to sweets and carbs. So that's why so many of us binge on sweets and carbs, because our body won't shut off that won't flip that switch to say you're done. So switch to alternative foods would be a better way to go. Yeah.
All right. Charlie and I could stay here all day and answer questions, but we want to set an intentional boundary here about your time and our time and capacity. And just say thank you again for being here with us today. We know that your time is valuable, and we really honor and respect it. And we appreciate you taking your time with us today to come here and to hopefully get some things that will help you, help your family, help your community, your team, whatever that might be.
Okay. Again, thanks so much for joining us. We're here to help. If there's something we can do, definitely reach out to us. Let us know. Jess will drop in the email address to send it to. We have a survey that's going to be going out with the webinar and the resources that we're going to send you. We'd really appreciate you to fill out. We have a tendency to overbuild and make stuff that maybe people don't need. So we want to make sure that we're building the right things and supporting you in the ways that you need to be supported, as opposed to just assuming things that you need. So we appreciate your time on that.
Yep, and you'll be getting an email before too long with the recording and the resources and all the things that you need from this.
Okay. Thanks, y'all.
Bye. Take care.